Welcome to Podcrushed. I am with my co-hosts Sophie and Sorry and
What?
Nava. Where's Nava? I just turned around for anybody who's not watching.
We're sad. We're weeping.
We're
on
crying
the
on the inside.
You can't see it, but it's on the inside.
I was going to say we're crying on the outside as well. But what we did in order to fill her absence, which is impossible. She provides the backbone, the structure, the top and the bottom, and the middle.
Where would we be without our Nava? Honestly, there wouldn't be a podcast.
So we went and got ourselves another Sophie, a Sophie Thatcher.
Can never have too many.
By the way, when I first heard her name, I was like, there's no way she's not British. There's no way she's not British. And then when we heard her come on the show, she did not have a British accent. And I thought, okay, all right. Well, actually, I technically knew she wasn't British when we started doing research for the podcast, but
yeah, which you did do, which is
we're assuming
he does do
I
it
did,
every time.
Which
he does
we're
do it every time, but
assuming I've done. But I was convinced. Our guest today is Sophie Thatcher, an actor you might know from films like Heretic and Companion. So hot right now. Which I'm saying unironically because she really is. It's like blowing up. Also from Yellowjackets. I mean, again, so hot right now. Its third season is now out. We loved hanging out with Sophie, and Sophie will too. Stick around, Sophie. Welcome to Podcrushed. We're your hosts. I'm Penn.
I'm Nava.
And I'm Sophie. And I think we would have been your middle school besties.
Sitting next to your crush on the school bus, staring out the window, listening to Radiohead and asking him to imagine a zombie apocalypse. Whoa.
Just a little voice acting for you.
So if we can, we'll start at 12, as we always do. I want to hear about the day-to-day, your just general life then, but we really also want to hear kind of how you were seeing the world, you know?
I think 12 is such a good age because that's when I was like, oh, I'm an adult now. I'm a mini adult.
Yeah.
And I'd been working for a couple of years. My first professional show was when I was 10 years old. But when I was 12, that would be 6th grade, I was living in the suburb of Chicago, North Shore, very John Hughes, very preppy, in Lake Forest. I remember not really having a lot of friends. And I remember doing this like Disney audition. And I used that as a way to make friends and told them I was going to be on Disney, but didn't get cast. But I was always away. I was that kid that was working. I was doing Oliver, the musical. And I played Bet, I think that's her name, this child prostitute, and would tell people that. Wow. And the kids were just very confused.
Yeah. Like,
I forgot that Oliver is technically full of, like thieves and prostitutes, and they're all children.
It's
right?
dark. It's dark, but I had such a blast, and I had that community and that family, and even just sharing the dressing rooms with the adults gave me wisdom and made it really hard to go back to school and then be with kids my age. I know that when I was 12, I was like 12 going on 30. And that's when I was, I grew up very fast, and I looked definitely older than I was and acted older than I was. But I think it was like 12, maybe when I was 13, I could pass for any age. It was one of those like, oh, she could be 20. She could be, I had people think I was in college when I was 13, but it was because I was so obsessive with seeming older. And it was coming from an insecure place and an actory place and being around adults all day. But I was in and out of school a lot and never did another Disney audition. I was singing a lot too. Lots of singing.
I heard you say in an interview that at a young age, you felt like you took comfort in sadness before even really knowing what sadness was, which I thought was so poignant, and also made me wonder, like, what was that like? What did that look like in the context of your family? Like, was that did you share that with your twin, for example, or was that something that was like just, oh, Sophie is that way, like a little emotional, sad?
Very, yeah. I think I was just always incredibly sensitive and was always just full of emotions that felt like I was gonna burst. So having music, I mean, I was just always had my headphones in. Still am that way. My bio on Instagram was singing, acting, dancing, Radiohead.
That's so good.
I was like, God, I had it. And then I changed it a couple years later to Let Down and Hanging Around. It's a great song.
Yeah, that's great.
But it was, I think my first post on Instagram was that, which is funny because to me, it was just my world. And I remember being on a bus and I sat next to this guy that I had a crush on. I think I was maybe 11. And I gave him my headphones and it was, what's the song, the spookiest song on the record? I should know this. The one that's talking about pigs, the talking one.
Fitter, Happier?
Yeah, fitter, happier, more productive. Yeah. I made him listen to it and I was like, look out the window, pretend you're in a zombie apocalypse. And he was like, what the fuck?
I like that was your first, that was like your pickup line.
I was like, just come with me to this world.
Wow.
Yeah, and I feel like 12 is an interesting time because you start finding things yourself rather than through influence. And I think because when I was 12, everything was just right there. And it was all algorithm based. And I was just on YouTube 24/7. I was would go home, immediately go on the computer. I was a big gamer, obsessed with Sims.
Really?
I started making Sims movies.
Wow. Wait, hold on. What does that mean? Sims movies?
Yeah, what is that?
You can, there are a bunch of cheats on Sims where you create these Sims. It's like, I'm creating a story and then you can film in the game. And then I would edit it on iMovie.
Whoa.
And I would get my friends to do voiceovers on it to the Sims.
What?
That is so cool.
It was intricate. But
and that hold on. That reminds me that I read, I think that you would make movies with your sister. Is that true? Yeah. So I mean, so was filmmaking this? I mean, how early on did this proclivity start?
Very early on. I feel like my dad always had a camera, so I think I just kind of grew up, and because he had an interest in photography and was just always taking pictures, and I liked being in front of the camera because I'm a narcissist. Gotta. But it was a lot of, my twin would do a lot of the cinematography. She was the DP. And then we would co-direct and I would act and I would scream and cry and boss all my friends around. Wow. I don't know if it was my 12th birthday or my 11th birthday, but it was zombie themed, where I got everyone dressed up and put makeup on them. And we made a movie. Wow. And it's great. And it's going to get, people will see it at some point. It was great.
Is it true you also studied Mandarin in middle school? Is that true?
You did your research.
Yeah, well, I thought that was so interesting because I went to high school in Beijing and I studied Mandarin there, which is very normal. But I was like,
oh, it's not normal.
Like for someone who grew up in Chicago or outside Chicago to choose Mandarin in like the mid 2000s. Interesting.
It's very, I'm surprised they had the option. I wanted to do French, but my dad wanted me to do Mandarin because it's closer. He speaks Japanese and was Mormon. He went on a Mormon mission in Tokyo. So I was just obsessed with that and grew up with like Studio Ghibli and everything. So I just wanted to feel a little bit closer to that world, even though Mandarin, I mean, some of the there's some overlap.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to be
some shared characters and things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like you're learning Gaelic. Yeah. Yeah. We can say there are similarities. Sure. That's fair.
Yeah, but I don't remember anything. And then I took French because I was just obsessed with anything French New Wave and still am. But that was when I was in high school. And in high school, I was so in and out of school.
Is it because you were working at that point?
doing some plays. I was doing a lot of theater. And then I had been cast in like the Chicago PD stuff, which is like Law and Order, but for Chicago.
Yeah.
So that was my introduction to television.
We have a couple of classic questions that we always ask anybody on the show. One is about your first experiences around crushes and heartbreaks. You told us a little bit about a potential first crush, but
so just dig deeper. That was a good
dig
one.
deeper.
Yeah.
That was a really good start.
I remember kissing a boy when I was like 4 or 5 and getting in trouble. I was so obsessed, and I remember every recess I would go in this swing set with this boy I liked, and I would try to get us so we're matching, and I would like talk this whole story and be like, oh, we're married now, and then we would separate. Oh, we're divorced. Da, da, da. And I would just be like improvising this story.
Wow.
And I was like, he's in love with me. I'm so charming. But it would never go that far. I didn't have a boyfriend until I was 16 or 17. I'd never really kissed anyone, but I think I scared away people because I was so intense. And I was just in love with everybody. I think it was every week I would have a new crush, and it would just I would dedicate everything, every move that I made in my, like anytime I had alone, I was like practicing what I was going to do, what I was going to say, what I was going to sing. I would have these, like, I'd be listening to Adele being like, I'm going to sing this at the school assembly and he's going to fall in love with me. Never happens, but.
Can I ask something that you probably, I would imagine this is a question you used to get when you were growing up alongside, the rest of your family, but because, we have no idea what she's like. And I have this special interest because I'm going to have identical twins. Like,
oh my God, let's talk.
Is your twin anything like you? Are you like, because you seem so distinct, and I mean that in a good way. Like you're like everything you're describing, the intensity, all this stuff, the specificity, the French New Wave, all this, it's
even the
it's great.
Swinging, the way, like the first part of that story, like we're married. It sounds like that could be many kids, but then like we're divorced.
Yeah,
it's so funny.
And there's just like you're painting such a vivid picture that I really feel like I'm going on a journey with you. So like, is your twin at all like this, or is she like, what are you on, Sophie? What,
no.
Where did you come
She's
from?
crazier than me.
Wow. Okay.
Which is, I think, also there's something very distinct about growing up with a twin, and I think our best friends and still my best friend were a set of twins. So it was me, Ellie, Eleanor, and Margaret, and they were twins, but they weren't identical.
Wow.
And that was just kind of worked out in a strange way. But Ellie was definitely leaning more towards, she would just draw all the time. She's an artist. She was sweeter than me. I think I was kind of the brat. And it's interesting how we shift. And we grew up with the same exact friends. I think I was a little bit more outgoing because I was forced to be with my job, and was just around people and learned how to talk around people.
Can I ask something maybe that I don't know if this seems personal, but like, did you come out first or second?
I was first and Ellie was C-section. So Ellie, I think that inevitably was harder, and Ellie had...
Wow, you came out and then Ellie
so
was
that's really... Wow. So I also
and
want
Ellie's
you to know...
left-handed, I'm right-handed. Ellie's more artistic and stranger, and I'm the actor.
This is really fascinating. So just so you know, my wife is a doula, and I know so much about birth and birth stories. I know, I feel like people who I'm close to, like I tend to know their birth stories, or at least I know a lot of her friends' birth stories. So that's really interesting. That's really interesting just to hear that, like, between two twins, it can be so different.
Yeah, no, and it was, I think, 17 minutes, something pretty long.
Yeah.
But I think that immediately, I mean, it just showed that Ellie was left, I was right.
She's
she
behind
was
the
more
camera.
shy. Yeah, she's behind the camera. I'm in front. And she was acting for a bit too. And we would do a lot of, I think our first thing together was Our Town, and we would alternate roles. Or I mean, we had the same role, but would alternate nights.
Fascinating.
But Ellie we just went our own ways. I think her anxiety was starting to build, and she was already so good at drawing and got into stop motion and claymation really early on. And I think even just like, sounds crazy, but using Sims and learning how all these cheats and all these hacks and just being on the computer 24/7 helped her so much with editing and what she does now. I mean, both of us were just chronically online. I had a Tumblr. I would like lie about my age to everybody. So did she. But that's just growing up on the internet.
Yeah, of course.
That's amazing. It is so interesting to hear from someone who's a twin. I found myself, as you're talking about yourself, fighting the urge to be like, and is your twin like that too? Like,
I know, right?
I wondered,
I know.
Is that something you experienced a lot growing up as a twin? You probably do. Like people just kind of like not treating you like a science experiment, but it is. I mean, even in psychology, in any like scientific research, we often research twins when we're thinking specifically about development, because it's like such a unique scenario where you can control for certain variables.
No, absolutely. I think it pushes you to kind of be distinct. And Ellie had the glasses, and I had this like terrible comb over. And it just forced us to be like, this is how we are different. This is how you tell us apart. This is how we are different people. And I think there's this innate feeling of competition. And it was never terribly unhealthy or anything, but I think we were just pushing each other. And because both of us were so artistic and would be drawing at the same time, give each other a prompt and then draw and then compare and see how that worked.
Wow.
And we're just working together on everything artistically and would just constantly like putting on shows, making movies. It felt like I didn't need any other friends for a really long time too. So I think there's also innate sometimes shyness. I think you find a lot of twins that I know are a bit more shy, and it's a little bit harder to break out of that.
Do you work on anything together now?
We do, yeah. I directed a music video for one of my songs, and she edited it and did some stop motion stuff. But I just want to keep, because she's doing stop motion. She's genius, truly genius. And my older sister is also a writer, director.
Wow.
So I just want to work with all of my sisters. And we like always are just talking ideas. And every time I see Ellie, we just spend like 3 hours going through our YouTube likes just to show each other new music, just to catch up.
That's so sweet.
Oh, I love that. So it sounds like you had just in general an artistic family. I mean, were your parents, they wanted that?
Not really. I mean, my dad was a lawyer and really wanted me to be a lawyer. And no part of me wanted that. And I knew that he didn't maybe fully believe in me acting wise, or didn't think it was practical. But my mom taught at a kibbutz sector and still does, strangely, but it's ironic because she's Mormon, or still kind of, I mean, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but she like plays the organ at the church still, and it's very much her community. And I grew up in the church, but I was gone so much because 8 shows a week, 2 Sunday shows, a matinee, that, I couldn't go to church, and that was my excuse to get out. But everybody was obsessed with music, obsessed with movies. I have an older brother that is just the biggest nerd and somehow knows everything about music and movies. So really early on, I was, I guess, taught to be pretentious. A blessing and a curse.
So just to be clear, when you say 8 shows a week, that means you were doing semi-professional or professional theater in Chicago. So what age was that when you like really did that?
So it would have started at 10, My first show is The Secret Garden.
So that was, you were doing 8 shows a week at 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it made me grow up really fast. And it's interesting because I don't refer to myself as a child actor because there's so many strange feelings about that. And it was never like my mom ever forced me. It was me forcing her.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah. She knew. But I think because it was theater, it felt different. And I know part of me, even though like my agents at the time were pushing me to do commercials, do audition, like all these lighter Disney things, I just never got it. And I'm very thankful that I never got into that world because I don't think I would be here. And it just felt so oppositional. And I felt like I was trying so hard to be normal and that they could all see through my lies. It was this huge existential thing for me where I just knew that I wasn't normal enough and there was something off about me and that I would never fit into this cookie cutter world. And I felt that when I was 10 years old, which is a very strange feeling for a 10-year-old.
Meet JLab. Headphones as versatile as you. You can work out, you can rock out, you can tune out, actually, if you need to. Sometimes it's necessary. Find the perfect fit with JLab. JLab's diverse collection of headphones has something for everyone in every moment. You can think headphones in a million different colors and styles with features you actually want for working out, chilling out, or jamming out. You know, for travel, I use the Epic Lux ANC over-ear headphones, and they're really comfortable and they're sleek. They look pretty sexy. They have the longest active noise canceling playtime out there, clocking in at over 60 hours. And, you know, I do travel a lot for work. And these are perfect on the plane, the LA to New York cross-country flights. I can catch up on podcasts I want, which is typically this one. You know, I just listen to my own voice on repeat. And these, no, that's not true. These are great for movies. It's so good on a flight. I don't have to crank the volume to drown out my snoring neighbor or the sound of the plane's engine. So if you want a more open experience, you know, not noise canceling, where you can hear your surroundings and still listen, you should check out JLab's Flex Open and JBud's Open Sports Styles. Look for the blue box at retailers everywhere or shop jlab.com and use code PODCRUSHED for 15% off your order today. So before we move on into, because I'm really interested in that like transition from this period into how you became, you know, because it sounds like you were mostly professional, like you were really doing it by like 2016 or so, roughly. Is that?
Yeah.
So before we go on to that, we got to finish up the classic questions. We did the crush. I think a first heartbreak would be. Is that something you'd be willing to share?
Yes. Well, I've had so many. I think it was every week. Every week I had a new crush. I can think of, I remember it was always through sending songs, or I would get something to be like, hey, this and this. I remember when I was doing Oliver, I had a really big crush on the kid playing Oliver, of course.
Yeah.
The lead.
And the lead. And I vividly remember showing him the song Heavy Metal Drummer by Wilco while we were driving to practice. And he was like, can you turn this off? This is weird. And that broke my heart more than anything. I was like, you don't get it? And that was really devastating. And we ended up, there was just a lot of drama on that set because we were a fling, but never kissed or anything. Because I had so much anxiety as a kid that that would happen. I think my first real heartbreak was in high school, where I didn't even kiss the guy, but we were so emotionally involved, and he would play me songs from Loveless on the guitar, and I would just tear up and be like, oh. It was like my first real deep obsession where it just like changed my world in like an adult way. And it was all through music. It was all through, I mean, a lot of it was Snapchat, but oh God, thinking about how kids have to deal with Snapchat, and they're used.
Oh,
I don't know if it's still like that, but you can see when someone opened it, and the streaks. Oh my God! If you lost a streak, then that was the end. That was heartbreak.
It's such a complex world. Yeah,
I actually don't know what a streak is.
It's like when you're like sending each other back and forth, and you haven't missed a day.
Yeah, if you break it, then they're over it. That's
the way that they keep you on the app is so
awful.
They have you.
You're so dependent on it. I mean, it would be photos of like
the ground, just
the
to
ground,
keep the streak going.
Oh my goodness, that is insane.
I was like, oh, profound. Thank you.
Wow.
But that was, God, thinking about that, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have that. I mean, now you can see on like DMs, they're like red. Or when people have their red receipts on, I'm like, I don't get it. I'm traumatized.
I think it's brave. It's brave to have your red receipt on or read receipt.
Yeah. I mean, I get it when it's like, oh, it's kind of forcing you to respond in a way if people aren't good at that. But I always get surprised when I see that people are still on Snapchat. I think you got to grow out of that.
You got to move on, guys.
Yeah, it's definitely for like, it's like for 12 to 16-year-olds, I feel like.
No, there are adults on it. I think it's such a weird look.
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, in 2017, that's how David and I, my husband David is a producer on the show, and he and I were just friends, and we added each other on Snapchat, and that's how we
kept the streak going.
No, honestly, it was. I don't think there was like a I don't know if that was such a thing yet, but yeah, that's how I actually have written about it before, and there was a time when I did really appreciate Snapchat, but I'm not on it anymore. I've grown up. I promise.
Good. Good for you.
No, but our final middle school themed question is, if you have an embarrassing story, if you could tell us that.
I would always, I mean, it's embarrassing and not. This is actually more bragging.
Give it to us.
Go ahead.
I think it was like every Wednesday we would have foot-long hot dogs, and I would always get into competitions who could eat it first.
With competitions
like the
with
fastest?
Who? With my friend, I think his name is Tate. And I would eat it. I would always win. But one time I got really sick after and had to go to the nurse because I was eating it too fast. And I think I was on my second where I was like, I want to go. And I had to go to the nurse. I spent a lot of time. That was also big. The going to the nurse was like therapy to me. Because if you need to get out of a test or anything, you put on your actor, whatever, and go to the nurse. But that's not a grand story, but I do remember.
That's solid though. That's solid.
And we've never actually had a story. Sometimes there are repeat stories. There are some things about middle school that are so like universal, but we've never had a hot dog eating competition story. So that's great.
So the way we'll segue out of school is like, how did you segue out of school? It sounds like you.
I finished through homeschooling, which was really.
So were you already going to LA then, or what was that?
It was kind of back and forth. So I spent my first year at this high school, Evanston Township, which had thousands of kids. I think it's like the second biggest high school in the United States.
Whoa.
So that was a lot. And with a high school that big, they weren't very accommodating to a working actor. And nobody really understood. And the teachers were kind of disappointed in me because I couldn't. They just saw potential, but I wasn't there. And it was so hard to keep up. And I had to get good grades because I was a perfectionist. But it like got to me to the point where I was like, school felt like hell. It truly felt like hell to me. And I was crying almost every day in the halls. So overwhelmed trying to keep up 2 lives. So I think I booked the movie. At
14, right? Roughly? Like I'm just appreciating the stress of like a dual lives at 14.
I know. Yeah. But then so many child actors feel that. But I think it was because I went to that huge public school that I was like, they do not understand me. People I was definitely a loner. totally a loner. Had like 2 friends, but I always got really unlucky with my lunch periods where my friends were never there. So I just bring my computer and bring my headphones and sometimes just like eat in different classrooms or places just to kind of have a moment to just listen to music. But I definitely didn't. I had my friends outside of school, and I had friends that were. I would go to School of Rock, and that's where I found people that were also really into the same music. And then I think um, going into high school, my sister started smoking a lot of weed. And I started smoking weed too, and it would just give me panic attacks, and that sent me down an existential crisis.
Yeah,
Because the
totally.
weed in Evanston, it was laced with something for sure.
Really?
I don't think any teenagers are getting good weed, let's be honest.
No, they don't.
By the way, I
That was in
realize
LA.
there's so much about what you're saying. I don't think I've said like, yeah, so much in an interview in so long, because there's so many things that I have had these same experiences. So I went to high school for like a month.
Oh,
And then I didn't, so I had some of the homeschooling thing, which basically meant no schooling. But anyway,
Oh,
I
it
don't,
was
I don't,
so
I don't,
fit. It was so
yeah,
fit.
yeah. So I'm just really like, wow, yeah, we haven't had somebody on in a while who like has really gone through that this specific period.
I'm
doing
sorry.
this stuff.
It's brutal. It's brutal. Thinking that was probably the most stressed out I've been in my life.
So-
No, I take that back. I'm like pretty stressed right now. Just
But it does sound like that you were being fed. It sounds like you were also embracing a pattern of life and a way of living that you really, really wanted. So
yeah.
what finally took you to LA, and when was it like, oh wow, this isn't just me trying to I don't know, like, make the most out of life in Chicago or Evanston. It's
I mean, TV felt so far away. I had done Chicago Med. I got very lucky with that. I had done like 2 commercials. I remember the first times that I was on screen, I thought I was gonna throw up. It was like the most anxious I'd ever been in my life, it was the first times that I ever experienced disassociation, which I'd never felt before. But then suddenly I was on camera and I was like, is this going to be the rest of my life for my job? I was able to overcome it. It was just the first couple times, even though it just felt like it felt like the end of the world. It was so intense and so much at stake when it was just like a tiny little role in Chicago Med. But as soon as I booked a couple other TV gigs just shooting in Chicago, and I think my Chicago agents wanted me to take meetings in LA when I was about 15. I think
Wow.
15, because I'd been doing a lot of theater and I was still kind of musical theater oriented, which I brought up Oliver, but I was such a musical theater kid. And I used to try to hide that in interviews because I was ashamed, but it shaped me. And I'm here today because of it. It's fine.
Let
You
your
gotta
freak
accept
flag
it.
fly,
You
Sophie.
gotta accept it. But yeah, in LA. So my older sister was also living in LA. And she was doing a lot of auditions, making her own movies. She was just in New York, went to NYU, and then moved to LA. So I'm stay with her. And just hang out and try to do meetings. I got a manager in LA when I was 15. It's the same manager that I have today. And it was just, after that, it was just doing endless self-tapes. And it felt like it was sending it into the void. It was like a couple years of that, doing it with my mom, and it would end up in screaming matches because doing self-tapes with your mom is
Ooh, yeah,
very
that sounds tough.
complicated. But yeah, I mean, I just feel, when I talk about it, I feel insanely lucky, but also like sadness for my younger self because I grew up so fast, but I don't think I would be here if I hadn't been so driven and so,
Yeah.
I guess, just obsessive. So obsessive. There was no other option, really. I just couldn't imagine my life because school was hell and I couldn't imagine doing anything like my peers. It felt like acting was an escape. And even though I put so much pressure on myself and it felt like life or death, that was it. It was no other option. It's interesting today because I feel a little bit freer and looser now that I'm in a better place, which is good. It's less like, if I don't do this job, I'm gonna explode.
You talked about your parents being like a little strict, not so strict, but like, you know, kind of guided by the Mormon faith. And I'm curious, at 15, going to LA and visiting your sister, it sounds like you didn't have parents with you. What was that shift like? And did it feel very stark, or were you already at 15 starting to have like more independent experiences before that?
Definitely pretty independent. So my parents split pretty early on. And as soon as my mom was strict in very specific ways, but she was encouraging with my career because she saw how happy I was when I was doing it. So I think going to LA to take meetings, sometimes she would go, sometimes she wouldn't. And I had Emma, and Emma's like 10 years older than me, but I think there was trust involved. And I felt like an adult out there. I have a very vivid memory of watching blue is the warmest color and then dyeing my hair blue and then going, do you know the smell? The DIY venue. I went this like disgusting, amazing DIY venue. And it was just like such a like monumental moment to me, and having blue hair at this punk show and being like, my people.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get that in Chicago because I wasn't exploring. And a lot of my friends were music oriented, but that was a beautiful moment of feeling like I had found my place. It's just so corny if you know the smell.
It seems like at some point you started to find a place that you wanted to be, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think even Prospect, I was really young in that. And that was my first, even though the movie, when it came out, nobody saw it. But then it went to Netflix and it went to streaming and people saw it. I think that was when I was like, oh, I love these genre movies because you get so much freedom and there's so much world building and story building, and you just have total freedom to start from the ground up. And that project specifically, it was shot in Seattle. It felt so anti-Hollywood. It was such a micro budget for a sci-fi movie, which is incredibly hard to pull off. I've never felt that level of, well, no, I have, but starting with that and feeling the passion from everybody, that was the most life-changing experience, being away and just living in a kind of a fantasy world, this strange sci-fi fantasy world. I think that was when I was like, oh, I kind of fit in this other world somehow. And now it's funny because I'm doing all these genre movies, and now I just want to do something that takes place in one room and has no monsters or anything. But you want what you can't have.
But to be fair to you, though, I mean, I have to say, like, even between, you know, some of your most recent, like Companion and Heretic, those are on the outside. You could say they're, I mean, they're genre pictures, but but not only are the films quite different. I mean, the roles are really dramatically different. And I mean, what's funny is that, and maybe it's because it's the most recent thing of yours that I've watched, but with Companion, I feel like there's something of that that intense, like, obsessive, loving Sophie that you were describing in Companion, right? Like you're just like, I'm here for you. I am here to love you.
But that's how I was in relationships. So it felt, and it's so interesting now. I mean, anytime I watch it, I don't even, the robot part, I kind of glaze over. I don't even, it's interesting also getting remarks about little mannerisms that I did that I wasn't even aware of. And I think they were just my own quirks that people thought, I mean, I should say it was intentional. So I sound like a very
brilliant,
sophisticated actor. But I think it was just innate. And a lot of the beginning of Iris was very much where I've been in relationships that really kind of desperate codependency. And it tracks with describing younger me, I suppose. But I'm definitely in a healthier place now. So it was interesting having to go back to that. It felt very like I was tapping into my high school self.
And it also seems like you must have been doing that to some degree for Heretic. I mean, the connections are obvious because both you and your co-star were
Mormon.
You grew up.
I mean, I'm clearly not anymore.
Right. Yeah.
People ask me, and I'm like, I just always question it. But I mean, I always try to respect all of my family too, because they're so, my mom's side, they're all so incredible and still like so liberal and so artistic. But yeah, with the Mormon church, it wasn't like anything traumatic, but I was never present or there because I had such a clear
Two Sunday shows.
I couldn't, and that was my excuse out, and it wasn't totally purposeful, but it was my way out, because church to me just felt like wasting hours where I could be, doing something really productive.
Did Heretic feel then like, and I know you've spoken a bit about this, but I'm wondering if we can find like maybe a new angle, the new Podcrushed angle on even this notion that you were, anybody going to church, to synagogue, to mosque, anybody who of any faith, who's, or any whatever it is, if you're adopting the framework of your parents, your family, something that's handed down to you, and you're just not present with it, and it's not you. I mean, so anybody's spinning their wheels in that position, and I'm curious, what kind of was it empowering? Was it what kind of, because I know what it's like as an actor to take on a role that comes at somehow what feels like, ironically, like a God-given time. You're just like, wow, this couldn't be more perfect for right now, and I am clearly the person to do this. So I'm curious, what your experience was on Heretic, especially, and then of course there's the obvious great questions about working with you and your co-star and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it was just interesting having to go back to that and feeling, because growing up Mormon, I remember assuming everybody was Mormon when I was very young, and would talk to kids at school. Nobody was. This is Chicago. So that forced me into the other category that made me feel already felt so other and strange and different. But then also feeling other with your parents was far more isolating. My mom was quick to understand where I was headspace-wise, and my older siblings had left the church really early on. So I had their influence in my ears, and I don't know if I didn't have their influence, if I would still be in church. I mean, I don't think I would be, but that was definitely a huge part of it, because I thought naturally you follow your older siblings, even more so than your parents at the time too, because I wasn't like rebellious or anything, but I guess I was rebellious in my passion, I guess. But it was interesting going back to that and feeling that tension. It was a lot of playing with that tension. And you see it in my performance, and it's the most like restrained and tense performance I've ever had, because a lot of it, even when it's not the dialogue, it's just a lot of reacting. And I feel it watching my performance, how much tension I was holding in my body. And it felt kind of like how I felt when I was younger, when I felt like I was going to explode because I didn't have control at points, which is one of the themes of the movie. And I feel like it ends up being a lot of themes for Companion and for Heretic. It's a lot about control and lacking control, and how that tension. But yeah, I found myself getting back into strange tics that I had when I was younger, with OCD, just like very specific things. And they amped it up because it worked great for the character. But I hadn't really explored that with acting before, because that felt too personal, or it felt too negative, maybe. But I think I'm far away from it now, that I was like, okay, I can bring this back. And it felt very just immediately brought back into that tension and that eagerness to please.
You know, it was so interesting watching you on Yellowjackets versus you on Heretic for so many reasons, but one being like in Yellowjackets, there's so many characters. You're in such a large cast, and then there's Heretic, where it's really just the three of you. Of course, like Topher Grace is in it. He has that lovely cameo.
I didn't recognize him, by the way.
I know, it took me a second.
I only realized that at his very last moment.
His wig is
it's so good.
Accurate. He looks so Mormon. Yeah. He did such a good job. And he was great. And
yeah, he was.
The wig was perfect.
Topher's been on the podcast. He has such an innate kindness that I feel like I could almost mistake him for a Mormon.
Yeah, he's a perfect
Mormon. Totally. Either that or Midwestern. And I'm both. I'm Midwestern Mormon. Awful.
What was it like to be on a set with, where most of your scenes are just you and these two other characters? Like, did the three of you spend much time together off set, or was it really just while filming?
It was amazing. It was amazing. I was just doing an interview about Yellowjackets earlier today. I was like, those goddamn group scenes make you feel like such a terrible actor.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're having to redo it. And especially if you have one, I'm not going to try not to swear. Especially if you have one line and you're just overthinking it and it takes you out. It's so impossible to be present. That's the hardest thing about Yellowjackets. But we work with such a good, talented crew that it makes it so much easier. But with Heretic, I was like, this is so refreshing. Every day I can be present. Every day I feel like I have purpose. It felt like a play. It felt like going back to my theater roots. So that was just so refreshing. And working with Chloe, I think the dynamic was immediately there. She's a huge cinephile, and we immediately bonded. And I find younger actors that I've met, a lot of them aren't as obsessed with movies as I am. And I think Chloe's even more obsessed. It's so refreshing. And she's so just like such a good, hilarious, strange person. We immediately bonded, and she truly feels like a sister. And then with Hugh, it was interesting because the dynamic in a way played out where like me and Chloe were really close, and we would always go hang out. And Hugh would sometimes come in, but I feel like I was just naturally intimidated because, of course, he's Hugh Grant. But also, it's the dynamic that's playing out in the script. And always, to some extent, like with Yellowjackets, the dynamics always kind of play out in the way they're written. And it's not always going to be that way, but I think because I'm young and actors are so easy to adapt and morph in the slightest ways that it naturally can play out that way.
That's true. I do think it's funny that you're noting that, because I think that does happen a lot more in your 20s.
I know. And then you can kind of separate
40s,
work.
And I'm like, I'm definitely like, I see it. But the last season of my show, I'm now no longer the youngest person. Like I spent so much of my life being the youngest person, and that's really not been the case for a while. And now I can watch every season with my show, like this cast of now younger people. They come in and they all kind of like bond, and they sort of do emulate either, just that way. Everybody develops a dynamic, and then I'm separate, really which is also the dynamic, So it's like it always happens in some way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I also love your show so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I've seen every episode probably like 5 times. It's so fun to watch.
Whoa.
That
okay.
sounds.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
amazing.
No.
You might be
but I
number
mean,
one
but
fan. Are you Joe Goldberg CC on Instagram?
Oh no!
I think just
Oh,
the fact
God.
that you actually
No.
watch
It's
it.
just so fun. It's so fucking fun, and it's
It
so. I find that when I'm stressed out, it's that. Well, BoJack is my number one. Like,
Oh wow.
gotta recenter myself. I've seen every episode of BoJack probably more than 30 times, just because
Wow.
it's my falling asleep show, and I can't fall asleep on a
Right.
TV show.
I'm honored to
But-
be alongside BoJack in any way.
Yeah.
That's actually
Yeah.
really
It's such a
that
good
means a lot.
Such a good show.
I love Will Arnett.
I'm
Will Arnett
excited.
so
Wait,
much.
so you guys have a new season, right?
Oh yeah, it's coming out April, and it like late April.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
that's so soon! Yeah.
It's so nice to hear that you and Chloe, of course, like actors are acting. I don't need them to be close or friends in real life, but it is really sweet to hear that you feel like she's your sister.
Love her. I
And
love
you
her
two
so much.
are magnetic together on the screen. I felt like you
It
played
works.
off of each other so well. Yeah, and you have it just felt so familiar for me, so real, like the two different attitudes that you have. And
We were
yeah, I
so
loved
different.
It was so good.
Yeah. It's funny because I originally auditioned for her role.
Oh, really?
And I mean, polar opposite. I was so very, very different take. And I was just so, it felt like character acting. And I was like, oh, I can prove to everybody that I'm a character actor. But then the other role was far more natural. So it made sense. I still have time.
And then you got the restrained, tense.
Yeah, I know. Like, oh, I'm going back.
No, it was so great. And then hearing your voice come in at the end for the credits was, I mean, it was haunting. It was so beautiful. And I was
that's you
curious
singing?
how that came about, like how they approached you for that or how it happened.
Yeah, so the directors knew. I think by that point I hadn't really released any music besides stuff on Bandcamp when I was a teenager.
Wow.
And that was all just in my bedroom, fucking around on Ableton. So they had done that. They'd looked at that, sent me an email when I was shooting Yellowjackets, and I responded within minutes. I was like, we are going to make this happen. I went in at like 10 p.m. in the studio in Vancouver, and we recorded it, and then we finished it in LA. And it was just really natural. I mean, I heard when I went to LA and I heard the instrumentals they had done, I was like, this is Mazzy Star. And it works perfectly because it just works with the themes of the movie and talking about iterations, and Fade Into You is an iteration of Knocking on Heaven's Door.
So
I was scared because it's such an iconic song and so many people have covered it, and I'm very I wanted it to be as like dreamy as possible, and I love Mazzy Star so much, so that was, I think, kind of easy to channel and didn't feel too far away from the music I make, even though it was a bit more like shoegazy, guitar-y, where I'm more synth heavy.
Right.
It was beautiful, really.
Thank you.
Is there also, you're on a song in Companion, right?
Yeah, it's just me humming. But I'd sent them, we were talking about soundtracks, and I sent them the Rosemary's Baby theme song. And then I sent them the Cannibal Holocaust theme song. And they actually used that, which is a fucked movie, but incredible soundtrack. They used that in the grocery store scene as like a temp. So I felt that was the first time doing a project where I was like, oh, like they're listening to me. They have a say. So they kind of built this romantic 70s soundtrack around it, following those themes. And then I had just talked about being obsessed with like broken waltzes. So I think that was like a step into the head of Iris's.
That's so cool. You're getting back to your Sims days.
Yeah, exactly,
Your Sims movies. Soon it'll all be you. Acting, soundtrack. I did have a couple questions about Yellowjackets. I know it's not actually like formally linked to the true story of Flight 571, the Uruguayan rugby team. Do you know this story?
Yes.
You must. Yeah.
What story is this? Is this the one where they ate each other? They froze and ate each other? Or is this?
Yes. So the rugby team crashed into the Andes.
Yeah.
Was
This was a long time
for
ago.
the 70s, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't actually. I mean, I'd read about it, and I know a lot of people. There was a book on it. My frame of reference was Lost, because that I grew up on that show, and background on my phone. You can't wait. Kind of show. My background on my phone is my dog that I grew up with, named after Sawyer from Lost.
Oh, yeah. Sawyer.
The best is such
a
great character.
I just recently rewatched Lost because I hadn't seen the final season, which actually was a mistake. Should have left it that way.
No, I know everyone talks about it. And I remember just being a kid, not understanding it, and then finally watching it and being like, "Oh, this is why
nobody
TV
understands
is so
it.
challenging." Nobody. Yeah. But that was my frame of reference, and I actually didn't do too much research.
That's okay. That's okay. We're fully accepting of no research here, just so you know.
I usually do, but with this, it felt, because we were shooting it during the pandemic, there was this immersion quality where I didn't want to over prepare, and there was this beautiful like intimacy and indie movie feel where it felt like you didn't have to over prep because it was all there. That mania that I felt like the headspace was so quick to get into, where it's harder now because we're doing all these projects in between. But I guess it was just watching a lot of Juliet. But yeah, I guess the stakes weren't quite as high the first season. And if my storyline was very much with Travis and it was very romantic, so that was very easy for me to draw from. And yeah, I feel like now this season it's becoming a bit more, I'm like, now I should maybe do more psychological research because it's getting deeper and deeper, and I want to keep it really dynamic. So if we don't know if we're going to have a season 4 or not, which still kind of baffles me. But if we go into season 4, I definitely would want to dig deeper into her psychology because, they've endured so much. It's absurd.
Well, I was curious about how that works when, as an actor, when you're playing young Natalie and Juliette Lewis is playing the current version of Natalie. And then season 3 we got to watch a couple episodes, and season 3 starts with Natalie's funeral. And I was just interested, like how do you, of course we still get you because you're young Natalie, but how do you interact with Juliette, and do you guys collaborate? Do you talk about like how you're going to play your characters because they're the same person?
We would a bit. It was a lot of texting. It was immediately sharing songs. She sent me some PJ Harvey songs, and I was like, okay, she gets it.
Yeah.
This is great. And it was just immediately we clicked, and I think there was just an innate understanding of each other. And I think because music is so big for her and she's such a true artist, that I just felt connected to her and looked up to her in so many ways. And I've learned so much from her, and playing her has been like such a huge challenge because it's so hard to stay consistent. And I can be very technical with my acting. And I think the first season, there's so many moments and so many lines where I'm just so hyper focused on her voice and her mannerisms and wanting within the third season too, now that she's gone, you want to feel her presence. So that I felt that pressure going in, but then there was also freedom because there wasn't the constant back and forth comparison. But I've watched up to episode 8, and I feel it's really sad. I feel empty without her character. And I feel like the show, you really feel her loss because the Misty Natalie dynamic in the modern storyline was just so perfect. It was so strange. But you really miss that dynamic. But yeah, I'm curious what they're gonna. I'm sure we'll have another season, but what they're gonna do for next season.
We always have a last question.
Yeah.
If you could go back to 12-year-old Sophie, what would you do or say?
Oh. I mean, I would first of all give her a hug because when I was younger, I like couldn't hug people. I had very like I didn't grow up in the most like touchy family. So I think that I would give her a huge, huge, like tight hug where I couldn't, back away or anything. I wouldn't say anything and I wouldn't change anything because I think even if I made any different decisions, I wouldn't be here today. And I think it was just because I feel incredibly fucking lucky. But yeah, I would give her a hug because she was so stiff and so scared and so intense and crazy. That's a little bit of it's a very earnest answer.
No, it's so sweet.
No, I love that.
Thank you so much, Sophie.
Yeah,
Thank you guys so much.
thank
This
you
is
for-
amazing. This is like
Oh, I'm so happy you feel that way.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
Yeah, this
That's
felt
great.
like therapy.
Podcrushed is hosted by Penn Badgley, Nava Kavalin, and Sophie Ansari. Our senior producer is David Ansari, and our editing is done by Clips Agency. Special thanks to the folks at Lemonada. And as always, you can listen to Podcrushed ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. Okay, that's all. Bye.
You're an identical twin. I am going to have identical twins.
Aw, exciting. It'll be a lot. I don't know what to say. I'm like, I'm ready.
A lot.
No, so
It'll
I mean,
be something
so
in another accent.